Hello, this is Dr. Gonzalez Mendez. I'm the chair of the Latino Health Forum. Welcome. Thank you very much for participating in this amazing, informative forum that this year has been through the Zoom version because, as you know, the pandemic prevent us to get together. But the idea is to reach as many people as we can, and uh, uh, it took several months to find the best people to talk about these different topics. And we're so lucky, we've been very lucky. But today I think we're especially lucky because we are going to talk to a couple of amazing people that are fighting for the most amazing causes. And the tomorrow is the last day of this series. We seriously thinking. Well, of course, we translating and interpreting to Spanish, and it's going to be. You can see the video eventually. You can see and Spanish, and then we are going to broadcast at the KBBF 89.1. That is, as you know, the first bilingual public radio in United States, and is here in Santa Rosa. So we really want to reach as many people as possible because this pandemic is affecting everybody, but especially Latinos. 75 to 80% of the cases are Latinos and or Latinx, and that is very concerning, very, very concerning. So the workshop today title is Calling Out Systemic Racism, Responsible for Mental Health Crisis at the Border and Beyond. So this is so important. We have more than 2,000 miles of border between Mexico and United States. So it's a big, big border. And that's the border to the rest of Latin America. Including Brazil and Argentina. I want to thank the sponsors that allow us to do this for free to the participants and to be so loyal for years. This main sponsor has been helping us 28, well, not the entire time, but many, many years. So let me introduce Dr. Belinda Hernandez Arriaga. It's such a pleasure. She's from the University of San Francisco, from a program called ALAS that is, well, I'll tell you a little bit more, but Dr. Hernandez Arriaga is an assistant professor in the counseling psychology program at USF. USF, one of the best schools in the area. For all the young people listening, is another possibility. And this is different than UCSF. The USF is a Jesuit, and in Latin America, they call it Universidad Iberoamericana. But it's a wonderful school, wonderful school. Not because my daughters went there, but because it's a wonderful school. So she's a founder and executive director of Ayudando Latinos a Soñar, and ALAS is the way to synthesize or put it in seagulls. She's also part of the Bay Area Border Relief Team that works directly with asylum seekers in Matamoros, Mexico. Her clinical focus is on working with Latinx immigration trauma and cultural tesoros of healing. That's amazing. Thank you, Doctora. The other speaker is Daniela Domínguez. She's a psychologist, also at Universidad de San Francisco. That I believe La Universidad de San Francisco is the first university in the Bay Area before Berkeley and Stanford, but I think. But it's a wonderful school, so please, students, check. And eventually you can talk to our doctors and ask them, because they are very young and very bright, and they are normal, but they are academically amazing. Dr. Daniela Domínguez is a research director at the Hanna Institute in the Sonoma Valley and the owner of On the Margins, LLC. She is also an assistant professor in the counseling psychology department at the University of San Francisco, where she coordinates the marriage and family therapy programs at the Santa Rosa campus. By the way, USF is one of the sponsors of the Latino Health Forum and been for a long time. And there's a campus in Santa Rosa. So there is no excuse, students. There's no excuse. You have to keep going. Gosh, well, I can keep talking about these wonderful speakers today, but I will ask them to please go ahead, and at the end we have some questions and hopefully answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and Doctora Belinda and Doctora Danny, let me know when you'd like me whenever you'd like me to pull up the video. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's so great to be a part of the Latino Health Forum, the 28th Annual Latino Health Forum. And what a gift this is to the community to be doing this work, to be engaging, and to be setting a standard for health and mental health, and also opening pathways for education. We really welcome anyone that wants to learn more about USF, wants to learn more about our program, the MFT and counseling psychology, and just about the work we do. So first of all, I just want to start by saying it's truly an honor for myself and Dr. Domínguez to be here today with you. As you know, and all of you have come today to hear about addressing disparities during COVID-19 and beyond, and in particular today our focus is on the border. And I want to start this first part of the conversation by just creating space to know that this is a difficult conversation. We are already coming in at a time when there's so much happening in our own communities, in our families, within ourselves. So I do want to just kind of come in solidarity that this topic at our border is a very emotional one. It's very emotional for us as well presenting today, because we've come to know the children, we've come to know the families, we've come to see, face to face over the past 2 years, the crisis. Since 2018, we started going to the border in southern Texas, both myself and Doctora Domínguez as part of the Bay Area Border Relief. Doctora Domínguez has also gone to Nogales, and she's going to share about that as well. But what we've seen on our borders has really been painfully present in terms of human rights violations, in seeing asylum seekers coming to our country for safety and literally us closing the door on them, and the physical and mental health challenges that this is bringing. And in this past week alone, it has really escalated to be another level of crisis that was already there. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that. But when we do these presentations, and just like today, I really want to share with you that there are folks at the border right now that know that Danny and I are both here doing this talk. And I want to situate them in the room with us, in this space. They are here with us. And while we are the ones bringing you this message, I really want their voices to be the ones that come through. And so my hope is that in the next 15 minutes, I can just share a little bit about their experience, what's happening, and bring their voices to the forefront. So with that, we will share a small video, a little bit of photos there, and a small video of a dad that's embedded in the video. And yes, Daisy, please.
This is the United States border between Brownsville and Matamoros, Mexico, where the lights shine is the United States. And on the other side is where there are families, children, and individuals waiting to ask for asylum and living in one of the worst conditions you can ever imagine in 2020. Asylum seekers living in Matamoros are being forced to wait to ask for asylum while the court process has completely stopped due to coronavirus. The process they are in is called the Remain in Mexico MPP protocol. One of our biggest worries right now are the children that are waiting for asylum. They understand that their home country is not safe, and as they wait, it's getting to be a very difficult situation for them at the border, emotionally and physically. Families at the border are suffering right now and living in very inhumane conditions, and they are physically and emotionally exhausted. The U.S. has turned our back on them, and more than ever, they are crying for our help. This is unfair, it's unjust, and it's wrong in 2020 that so many families are suffering when they are fleeing violence and asking for humane asylum.
Bueno, como podemos ver, estamos aquí con estas grandes tormentas. Está lloviendo en el campamento de inmigrantes de Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Aquí estamos luchando, sobreviviendo, ya que estamos a punto de el campamento ser inundado también por el río Bravo, más con estas tormentas, estas lluvias, estos vientos. Es exageradamente un peligro para todos nosotros aquí. Aquí ya vemos familias, niños, por favor, ayúdanos para poder salir de este lugar, es lo que pedimos. Ya no aguantamos estar en este lugar, estamos peor que los animales en este lugar. Ayuda, por favor, ayuda. Como pueden ver el río, cómo está en los momentos. Mire el agua, cómo está. Por favor, necesitamos que los ayuden para poder salir de estos lugares, ya que no es fácil estar aquí. Tenemos mucho tiempo de estar aquí. Ayuda, por favor, para poder salir de estos lugares.
This video was a small clip made by a father who has been an MPP for nearly a year. In the video, he's pleading with us to please help them. We are living like animals. This is worse than any conditions you can imagine. Please, please help us. We hope that our presentation today will highlight the strength and beauty of the asylum seekers that are waiting at the border, and that will move you to action and support, as we all should be doing more in 2020 to make a change.
So this video and these photos, the photos of the children, the dad just sent that to me this week, and he said I could share. But what I want to say about them is they're so beautiful. He told me, Belinda, look at them. They're all from different countries, all together here waiting with their parents for asylum. But in this photo, what people don't see is that they almost just got hit by a hurricane at the border in Matamoros. So what happened is the families were pushed out of their tents into a little bit higher land and are living in such scary conditions because they didn't know if the flooding was going to overtake the whole camp. And they didn't know where they were going to go and what was going to happen. Right now, as we speak, the families are facing severe infestation from mosquitoes. There was snakes that washed up. There was fish that washed up. And this is at our US border where we have so much wealth, so much opportunity here. And the one thing that I always try to share when we talk about this is that no one would live in these conditions unless they had to. No one would stay under these dire situation unless they had to. And what I think it's covered up in the media and in the news is that people are just coming for, you know, a better life or for financial reasons. People are really coming because they're fleeing for safety. And the countries that they're coming for, the situations that they're experiencing is life or death. And so what we have found now is every year it's gotten worse. So before, Dr. Domínguez and I would talk about when they would come in for asking for asylum through the detention system, and they would be stuck in detention, and children were behind cages, and families were separated and are still being separated in another way. But what has shifted in this last year is that families are now being forced to wait in Mexico in this tent camp, with dependent upon just nonprofit grassroots organizations like ours, like others, to bring them in their daily food, to bring them in their supplies. There's no one really caring for them there. There's not, the United States doesn't have this whole outfitted organization that's providing resources. In fact, there's nothing there from the US side. And on the Mexico side, which they agreed, you know, with this US contract that they were going to be caring for them, they have what we call INM from Mexico that are basically military watching over them. But there's no one providing for their daily care other than US volunteers. And with the shutting down of the border due to coronavirus, what's happening is we're seeing a complete decline in the mental health and the physical health of this community. So one of the things that I think is really important when we talk about what's happening at borders, and Daisy, if you want to turn this off, it's fine. When we're talking about what's happening at borders now, is that we are seeing these really strong families, these families that have sacrificed so much of their lives, 1 year, some more, waiting and going through this really complicated process, being really emotionally present and physically strong to try to weather this. You know, I think one of the dads told me a couple of days ago that nobody would hardly be able to weather this just coming off the street. Like, they built up this kind of stamina because they've been through this for so long to make it day to day out in the elements. You know, they go to sleep at night. Imagine they go to sleep at night in a tent where there's no door to lock, and they're out in Matamoros, which is the #1 worst crime city in all of Mexico. There is cartel presence there. They're scared. Every night they go to bed, they're scared. But what's happening now is that this is taking a toll on their mental health. They're actually telling me, Belinda, I can't, I'm fatigued, I'm exhausted, no tengo ánimo, casi ya no podemos. The kids that we talk to on a regular basis used to call and say, hola Belinda, ¿cómo están? Estamos aquí con ánimo. But what happened is that now the courts are on hold. So there is no court process right now. Everything has shut down. So on top of weathering this storm literally and weathering the elements and the harsh conditions, what they're also weathering is that there's nothing to look forward to, that next court process, that next hope that perhaps someone will open the door, even though that process has been very flawed as well. Folks don't have legal representation. There's no opportunity for them to have support if they don't understand anything. There's just so many challenges. But what we're seeing now are the families are getting desperate because they can't go back home. They cannot go back home because of the dangers they face, but they also are really challenged here. So right now, we just went in March. We came back March 2nd, right when coronavirus and the pandemic hit, probably at the very beginning of the pandemic. So we just saw them. And right after that, I think it was 2 weeks later, they shut down the border for volunteers coming into the what they call the camp. So there's very few volunteers that can get through, but we can't get through in mass quantity to give supplies, to give resources. So it's very limited, and there's less U.S. vigilance. So now what's happening is we're starting to see more crime increasing at the border. We're seeing more cartel presence at the border. We're seeing more kidnapping. We've seen recently some cases. And so this is pushing families to the extreme, and children are witnessing this. And so what do we do? I think being here today is a big part of saying, Latino Health Forum, thank you for letting us bring their voices to you, because even myself, some days I feel really helpless of what more can we do. We're trying to advocate on social media. We're trying to advocate to petitions. We're trying to contact our representatives. We are writing briefs. We're doing psychological evaluations. We're taking in here in Half Moon Bay, the Alas community in the Bay Area Board of Relief have welcomed newcomers and have newcomers living in our community. We're doing everything we can, but from a distance, we're working to be making calls regularly to care for their mental health, just to try to say, estamos contigo, no están solos, estamos aquí. We got them, you know, we try to get resources in as much as we can, but it is a crisis. And being here today to witness to you, because we are witnesses, helps to bring their voices here for all of you to witness. And so I think that's the first part, is that people tell us all the time, well, they're not on the news anymore. We don't hear the stories. We don't know what's happening. So being here today, hearing, you know, this dad's voice, seeing the photos, hearing what we're sharing with you is one part of witnessing, and the other part is sharing. And we will talk about that in the next part after Dr. Domínguez, to look at what can we do from here. But I think it's really important that today, more than ever, we stand in solidarity with our asylum seekers, that we remember the children. And the children, believe me, they are not saying, why did my parents bring me here? They're saying, no podemos regresar a nuestro país, es súper peligroso, which is saying that they also know, they live the danger of their country. And one more thing is that for a whole year, none of these children have gone to school, you know, and this is happening at the hands of the US. So I come here with a heavy heart of hope, all mixed up into one, that we can push for change, that we can continue to ask and to care and to say what's happening to them, and that we can continue to highlight the oppression that continues at our United States border. And so with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Domínguez.
Thank you so much, Doctora. Before I get started again, I want to thank the Latino Health Forum, but also I want to thank my colleague, Doctora Belinda Hernandez Arriaga. She is someone who has been, you know, an incredible activist in collaboration with the Bay Area Border Relief. She has opened her heart. She has been invested in this revolution, invested in working with communities that are disadvantaged, disenfranchised. And it really is an honor to be able to present with her today and to be her comadre. As she said, we have had the opportunity to go to Matamoros and collaborate and support the communities there. But as Dr. Enrique was talking about, the border is massive. And so these humanitarian crises are happening all across the border. So for me, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the impact of systemic racism and how it's connected to what's happening at the border. Recently, I have been reading Ibram X. Kendi's books, and he is a leading scholar in anti-racism. I really encourage you to check out his Instagram account, his website, all of his books. But in order for us to contextualize this, I think it's really important for us to have a definition of what anti-racism and racism are. So what I really appreciate about his definition is that he says that a racist and an anti-racist is not who you are, but is what you're doing in a particular moment. So very often, you know, when we're kind of in community and we start talking about immigration concerns, or we start talking about structural racism, institutionalized racism, people get a little defensive, right? We've seen this in our classrooms. We've seen in our counseling and cross cultures classes and in other topics that we cover. shoulders start going up, people start shrinking, people start puffing up. And, you know, immediately when people get defensive, they say, you know, well, I'm not a racist. I actually support this, or, you know, I have a friend, or whatever kinds of reactions that are happening are kind of based on this idea that being a racist is a fixed identity, and being an anti-racist, it's fixed identity as well. So what would happen if we actually consider our behaviors, right? If we were to ask ourselves, I've been, you know, as Dr. Enrique was talking about, I have my own consultation firm called On the Margins. And recently, since the tragic death of George Floyd, we've been getting a lot of calls around, can you help us with anti-racist training? Can you provide culturally competency or humility training? And of course, you know, it's important for us to sit through seminars, but more importantly is for us to really be able to critically assess all of our behaviors. What is it that we actually stand for, and what is it that we actually stand against? I think as Sonoma County, we really have to consider, you know, if you're here today and you're thinking, why is it that we're talking about you know, the migrant communities at the border and what's happening at the border and the health of people at the border? How is that connected to Sonoma County? It has everything to do with Sonoma County. First of all, the Latinx population in Sonoma County is very large. But second of all, I think it's also connected to how it is that we are participating and collaborating with those agencies that continue to criminalize and dehumanize migrant communities. So if we think about, you know, who am I? And what are the behaviors that I'm engaging in, I frequently think about, because this is hard work, right, comadre, right, doctora? This is hard work. We have to consider, is the behavior that I'm engaging in, what's coming out of my mouth, how is that impacting the communities that I'm working with? What is it that I'm supporting? What is it that I'm putting my money behind, my energy? How is that supporting or disenfranchising or, you know, perpetuating anti-Blackness, oppression, racism? And what is it that I can do to make sure that those communities that are in pain can experience some healing? So I want to talk a little bit more about the work that I have also been doing in Nogales, like Dr. Hernandez Arriaga. We've been doing some work in Matamoros with the Bay Area Border Relief. But I wanted to also do my own research as far as what are some of the policies that are deeply grounded on systemic racism, you know, that kind of grow out of systemic racism. So in Nogales, and this is the Arizona border, so there's the Sonora side, and then there's also the Arizona side. I was able to do research and interview judges, interview migrant communities, asylum-seeking communities, and also even Border Patrol agents, and I've actually been able to walk through the desert. There is this particular policy that is called prevention through deterrence, which started in 1994, you know, under the Clinton administration. So this gives you an idea, and I don't want to necessarily go into history because I don't want to bore you all, but this gives you an idea that this is not, although it's not an apolitical process, we're not talking about this, you know, kind of coming out of the nationalism and the racism that we're seeing under the Trump administration. This has been happening for many, many years, but certainly we've seen a level of pain and a level of suffering that we haven't seen in before, you know, under the Trump administration. But under the Clinton administration, this prevention through deterrence, what they did was a lot of the migration flows that were happening from Mexico to the US were happening in the urban areas. So, you know, right in the cities. With prevention through deterrence, what Border Patrol and what ICE ended up doing was they ended up locating agents right in the areas where the migration flows were happening. So what they ended up doing was they ended up funneling those migration flows to areas in the desert that are deadly. So, you know, if you might be wondering, how is it that, you know, is this intentional? Is this, you know, unintentional? What's happening? I deeply believe that we have to consider, you know, how these particular agencies, what it is that they're supporting and what they're standing for, you know. So I'll go back to the prevention through deterrence in just a second, but I did want to underline that Border Patrol and ICE, their unions have endorsed President Trump and his policies. So we cannot, overlook that. We cannot neglect that. The unions of Border Patrol and ICE are endorsing the Trump administration and their policies. So with prevention through deterrence, what they're doing is, as they're funneling migrants, the migrants are going into these deadly areas, and they're experiencing dehydration. They are experiencing injuries. And we're seeing, just like Dr. Hernandez was saying, grassroots organizations, non-for-profit agencies rising and providing a lot of support that we haven't seen from the federal government. So we have organizations such as No More Deaths and people helping people in the border zone. Please feel free to, I encourage you to follow them on Instagram. They're doing amazing work. But contextualizing this in the present moment, right? This is something that started in 1994, but it has resulted in thousands of deaths at the border. Deaths by dehydration, deaths because the families can no longer keep going. They cannot keep walking. And this is, again, directly tied to someone making a decision to implement this policy. It's an entire system implementing this policy. So this week, last week actually, on Thursday, No More Deaths, which is this organization that actually ends up putting water, gallons of water in the deadly areas of the desert, ended up getting raided by immigration, by Border Patrol, by their tactical team. And if you take a look at what happened last week, we're talking about human rights violations. This is a non-for-profit agency, a humanitarian aid organization that all it does is try to save lives. It tries to save the lives of migrant communities, families that are fleeing against violence, families that, maybe they were even asylum seekers, but couldn't necessarily go through the process. So they were left with no option but to cross the desert and go into those deadly areas. There are reports that Border Patrol agents have been dumping the water from those gallons. And again, last week, we had these volunteers providing aid and Border Patrol raiding, taking all of their case notes, basically taking the cell phones of all of the volunteers and arresting approximately 30 undocumented migrants. And so all of that is right now under the custody of Border Patrol. So why is it that we're going into this? It's important for us, again, to consider why is it that Border Patrol and ICE have been militarized? Why is it that that's happening? It goes back to this idea that migrants pose a threat to the U.S., right? If we didn't see migrants as threats, we wouldn't have Border Patrol, if you look at the pictures again, with the tactical gear that they have to arrest folks that have been undocumented and are close to dying. The reason why these humanitarian aid groups are helping these migrant communities is because they're dying. They cannot even transport the migrants. They understand that would be illegal. All that they're doing is they're offering water and medical assistance. And again, their cell phones were confiscated and they're mistreated, and we have migrant communities that are being arrested. So why is it that we're criminalizing the behavior of individuals that are just trying to survive, that are fleeing violence, that are fleeing domestic abuse, that are persecuted in their home countries? What can we do in Sonoma County to make sure that we are not perpetuating racism, not only at the border, not only in Mexico and the US, but beyond? One is, I think that what we need to be careful of is we need to really consider whether we should be collaborating with these agencies. We just saw, in the past couple of weeks, how the Department of Homeland Security was going into Portland and was arresting people in rental cars that were unidentified. Last week, we saw, again, Border Patrol raiding this humanitarian aid camp. Do we really want to be collaborating with agencies that are engaging in human rights violations? So there are all of these movements that are calling to dismantle the Department of Homeland Security, to dismantle ICE, to dismantle Border Patrol. And when I have conversations with people, very often, they'll say, well, my uncle works for Border Patrol, or my tío works for Border Patrol, and they're good people, they're not racist. Again, we go back to this definition of what racist means. The definition, according to Ibram X. Kendi, is not, you know, a racist or an anti-racist. It's not who you are, but what you're doing in a particular moment. So what are we doing in this particular moment? I'm not talking about your uncle. I'm not talking about your primo. I'm talking about a system that, again, is putting people in cages. It's hurting people, is causing trauma. So do we really want to support an agency that has an annual budget of $50 billion a year? Do we want to build healthy communities, or do we want to fund and support agencies that are contributing to the prison pipeline industrial complex? What are we about, Sonoma County? You know, like, let's build healthy communities. Let's really consider, let's be ambitious. The fact that this has been happening doesn't necessarily mean that it has always happened. Before 2005, and when Operation Streamline, which is another policy, was implemented, migrants were processed in civil courts. Now, you know, after 2005 with Operation Streamline, they're being prosecuted by federal criminal justice courts. It doesn't mean that that was always the case. This started, you know, in the wake of 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security has not always existed. So can we think in a new and creative way? Is there a way that we can divest funds and invest in building social and community programs that can actually ensure the health of those communities that have been overlooked and forgotten? So again, just kind of wanted to say that, kind of wanted to tell you about a couple of things that have happened recently and how it is that we can contribute. Let's think critically. Let's think about who we want to support, where we want to put our energy at. And I will own kind of what my positionality is. I really don't think that Sonoma County should be in any way collaborating with ICE. I think that is, again, if we are moving in the direction of engaging in anti-racist practices, that is not in alignment with those values. So we really have to reconsider who we are, what community we want to create, and make sure that we show up, that we speak up, that we engage in anti-racist practices in whatever way you think, you know, can be done. If you're, you know, a mom that has kiddos at home, is there a way that you can retweet whatever Doctora is posting on Twitter? Is there a way that you can put your money behind, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement? In thinking about against systemic racism, we have to take an intersectional approach, an intersectional lens to the way we look at migrants. 44% of the immigrants who have been detained at the border are from Haiti. The majority of them are Black communities. So Black immigrants have, you know, higher, they're placed in solitary confinement for longer periods of time. They're detained for longer periods of time. Their bonds are higher. There are reports of torturing happening. And I encourage you to look at the Raíces website, where they actually do talk about how Black immigrants in detention centers and at the border are disproportionately impacted. So when we're saying immigrant communities, we're talking about like non-Black communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities. And we have to remember that the struggle for Black liberation is a struggle for migrant justice. The struggle for migrant justice is a struggle for Black liberation as well. So we're just fighting for the dignity and the humanity of people that have been, again, overlooked. And I think I'll pause because I think there isn't a question, but I'm mindful of time. Daisy, did you want to add anything, comadre, to what I said, Doctora?
No, I just think that one of the things that comes in my mind is what can you all do within Sonoma County, but also you're the next generation that's coming up, coming out, and we need you to start thinking about how do you position yourself to be in systems where you can create change. And if you're also not in systems, you're fighting against systems to create change, right? So we need Latinos at all levels to be active, to be engaged, to be questioning, to be advocating, and really to be present at different levels. And I'm really excited because when we look at you, when we see, you know, when I've been in the Latino Forum before and see you all out there, it's like you are the next generation and we are counting on you, and so many are counting on you. So how do you start to really embrace what Doctora Domínguez is saying and recognize that there is, you know, oppression and privilege and power in systems that at times we don't really understand because we see it from a very, well, from different perspectives. But migrants right now at the border and Latinos all around the country are living during a time where we have been criminalized and where systems are continuing to use that as a, as points of continued criminalization, oppression, and marginalization of our people. So right now is really a time when people say, what can we do? Everyone tells me, Belinda, vote, you know? And right now, more than ever, we need folks to be working on getting the vote out. And if it's not just like, oh, well, I'm pretty sure California is going to go for Trump, you know, that's not the answer. We have to get out, and we also have to be helping other states. Counting the census right now, I know that that's debatable, right? And it's something that everyone has to think about. But I think when we think about resources for our community, we need those. And so we need to be advocates to be able to get those resources, to leverage services. And for those that we are bringing in today from the border, those children and moms and fathers, that you can continue to connect, whether, like Doctora Domínguez said, on Twitter, on Facebook, on social media, pushing their voices, pushing the narratives, talking to people that you know. You know, they know that you're watching them. I'll just share this one story. There's on Twitter, and maybe we'll put it up. It's actually, they told me, Belinda, gente piensan que es nomás una persona, but there's 3 guys that they're going under the name on Twitter of El Inmigrante, so not Inmigrante, but Inmigrante. I'll put it up in a little bit. And it's 3 of them there in Matamoros, and they write every day, and they give updates, and they share, and they tell me, you know what, people are listening to us. We see them hearing our voice. We see them tweeting what we say. And that has meant so much to know that people beyond their walls, beyond the border walls that to them feel like jail, are really hearing them. And so I encourage you after today to like them, to follow them. I'll put that up so you can see. But it's small actions that we can do to make at least folks know that they're being heard. That it starts with simple actions into much more bigger and complex. And we challenge you to think bigger and to push for more advocacy. I think we have time for questions.
Yes, so it is necessary to understand the origins and connections of present policies and actions to the past. What is the of the faith communities? So I can speak right now for Nogales, and maybe Doctora Belinda Hernandez can speak for Matamoros. In Nogales, Sonora, there is this organization called the Kino Border Initiative, which is a Jesuit organization that basically feeds migrants right before they're about to cross the desert and offers them a shower and meals right after they've been deported or they've gone through Operation Streamline. So the faith communities are very much invested, and they've been invested, you know, they've provided sanctuary for years for migrants in Arizona, and they've been, you know, completely every day they go to the desert, they leave water. If you haven't learned about a particular case, I encourage you to, I believe his name is Scott Warren, but he was, it's Scott Warren, right? He's a volunteer for No More Deaths, which is it's a faith-based organization. And he was simply providing aid to two undocumented migrants who were crossing the border. And he actually had to go through 2 different court proceedings. The first time he went through trial, there was a hung jury. And then the second time he was acquitted. But he was facing 20 years in prison for offering water to migrants that were experiencing dehydration. So we have people in faith-based communities stepping up and doing beautiful work. And then also, again, ICE and Border Patrol criminalizing their own assistance and their own aid. So we have to kind of keep that in mind. Anything to add to that, Doctora?
I think that, I don't know if you all think about humanitarian aid, like everyone, sometimes we make assumptions that there's Red Cross there, this is a crisis, like there's aid there, there's, you know, folks that are doing this from what we usually kind of visualize as who would be on the ground helping, but literally that's not the case. In Matamoros right now, we're actually asking for what other aid can come in to help them because of the deterioration of their physical condition and the decline in their mental health. We were gonna start a Cariño hotline to be able to have folks check in on some of the migrant families that are separated due to COVID. Luckily, COVID hasn't really come into the camp, but they are separating some of them. But with the whole flood and storm, hurricane, and the movement of everything, it's been a little bit more difficult. But we would like to let Daisy know if there's ways that you know, we need help, we can outreach, we will let her know. And maybe there's Doctor Enrique, a mail out or something where we can let people know how to get involved. But I think that we are pushing for aid. And right now, you know, if you can be contacting your representatives about concerns and issues you have regarding not just what's happening at the border, but I will share this with you. In 2000, it's been 6 years ago, in Happen Bay, we had a really sad death of an 18-year-old who had mental health condition, Yanira Serrano, and she was shot and killed by the police 20 seconds after her family called for her to take medication. They wanted the police to help because she didn't want to take her meds. And we live in a small community, and usually the paramedics would come when the police were called. It was kind of a system that they had. But this time an officer that was a new beat officer came out, and he wasn't familiar with the family. And she saw the lights and sirens, and, you know, it just turned into a really bad situation. She was shot and killed, and our Latino community was paralyzed. We were like, we don't know what to do. We're in a rural community. We had never really risen up to stand up against a system. We've always kind of been in the shadows. And we started to mobilize little by little. And what we ended up creating was a Latino Advisory Council in our community. That was 6 years ago. And now we're at the table with every political decision that's made, because we've been consistently present to make and demand change. And we've had to find our voices when we didn't have voices. We've had to stand up when we didn't really have anyone else standing up for us. We had to do it. And because of that, we've really seen the difference that we had in a system to be able to make change. It doesn't happen big overnight. It happens little by little, but consistency. So I challenge all of you today to think about who's going to come to that table to be that consistent present at city council meetings, at county meetings, when they're making decisions for you all. Who's coming to the table when they're having negotiations with the police contract? Who's at that table from this group? Who's there? Who's present? You know, if ICE is in your community, who's standing up to that? Who's coming? Who's making the phone calls? Who are your mentors? Like, I'm sure Dr. Enrique is, you know, other people. Who are those leaders that you can collaborate and partner with? And change can happen. I have seen a tremendous amount of change happen over this time. But one thing it takes is consistency. You have to continue to be there, be present, stand up, make your name known, let people know you're there. Let people know that you're going to show up every time. right? Learn how to dialogue and how to advocate and how to use legal supports and how to create a team for the Latino community there in Sonoma County. You have a big advocate with Doctora Domínguez. She's there in your community, and leverage that. Leverage your education. USF is there, and we are here. We also are standing all the way from San Francisco to the Matamoros border. And people say, well, why don't you all help in Tijuana? And we said, well, because we went when children were being separated, and that's where it was happening in 2018. And so what we did is we didn't just go there and leave. We've stayed there, and we've committed to there, and we've made a difference there too. We're talking to families every single day. So you know what? We sometimes put up our own walls. We sometimes see things as a wall when we have to figure out how we're going to break that down and how are we going to make change. So I challenge all of you to get out there, make change, stand up, speak up, be inspired, look for ways to engage, get involved, and you are the next generation.
Yes, and I want to go ahead and echo that, Doctora. Thank you so much for mentioning that, how this work, and I said this at a Los 100 presentation last week or a couple of weeks ago, that this work does have to be ongoing. And I said we can no longer work in silos, have psychologists working on one side, political scientists on another side, attorneys on another side. We can't. We need all hands on deck. We need a multi-generational, multiracial movement to rise up and demand justice for immigrant communities, including Black, Indigenous, people of color communities in the migrant community. So very simple. There are incredible organizations out there that can tell you exactly what to do. So for instance, if you are someone who does not support detention, go ahead and post and put your body on the line and say, we are not going to support the construction of detention facilities that will house children and women and people of color in Sonoma County, in the Bay Area, in the US. We will not support the construction. Or you could also say, we actually support the closing of all of those detention facilities. And if you are about it, and if you are someone who believes in it, call for the abolition of ICE, call for the abolition of Border Patrol, call for the dismantling of the Department of Homeland Security. Let's get ambitious and think critically. You know, just like we have our own points of view, we're not saying, you know, you have to think the same way, but really assess where it is that your values and beliefs are coming from and how they align, and then how they're connected to health. I mean, this is the Latino Health Forum. What's happening right now is shortening the lives of migrant communities. And those migrant communities very often end up here in Sonoma County. So what can we do to make sure that we ensure their health? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctora Domínguez and Doctora Hernandez Arriaga for the wonderful presentation and for informing us about the work that you're doing at the border and how basically it's kind of, you know, like a ripple effect of different challenges and things that are going on, but the same way that is a ripple effect in terms of the issues that are happening, so can the work and the change be done, right? So we will move into our Q&A session right now for the last couple of minutes of our webinar. So just for folks who haven't joined us before, so you know, we have a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen where you can submit some of your questions. We also have an option for you to ask your question live. So if you use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen as well, you can do that and we will unmute you so you can ask your question to either Doctora Daniela or Doctora Belinda. So let us pull those up. So let's see here. Okay. So we will start with some of the written questions that we kind of started jumping in on. So let's take it back a step. So Earlier, we have a question for Danielle in terms of, the supporting these cruel racist agencies, in her words. No, we do not want to support these agencies. How do we remove support?
Yes, thanks, Pam. Being very thoughtful and intentional about who you are electing into office. And this again makes people nervous, but we have to hold the people that represent us accountable. Part of that is making sure that we have representation in office, and I mean, Latinx immigrant representation in office. That doesn't necessarily mean that sometimes we don't have Latinx identified representatives, elected officials that end up becoming a part of these oppressive structures and end up forgetting, their history and what their constituents actually care about. But it's really important for us to make sure that we vote, to make sure that we have a voice, to make sure that we fill out our census, that we get counted. And so that's I think, policy is so important. We know that when it comes to health, we have to consider the social determinants of health, and the root causes of health concerns are often social, economic, political, and behavioral. So politics and the economy are completely connected. So, when we're thinking about, are the people who are currently in office, do they have our interest in mind? Do they have the interest of the campesinos, of the people working and being engaged in the cosecha? Or are they just mostly concerned about folks in Santa Rosa? Are people considering those that are in unincorporated areas within Sonoma County? It's just, again, the power of our vote matters so much. So I think that would probably be a good place to start, to just not only think about November and the midterm elections, but also who it is that we're electing locally.
Yes, definitely. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's folks get a little, shy, or they're not, maybe as confident as in themselves as they can to like really think that they can make that change. But sometimes it's overwhelming because we want to do something really big, right? But starting at that local level, I think, is really important. So I'm glad you can highlight that. So we'll jump to the next question. So here we have a anonymous question. So we have someone saying, do you have information on COVID cases that are happening at the border?
So right now it's been pretty much a miracle, but in Matamoros, I was calling it like a milagro, because really they haven't had any COVID cases. It's been shocking because it feels like Dios puso en protección arriba de ellos, like a blanket of protection, because they have not had COVID cases. Now, what happened was they did start to do antibody testing, and they decided to start to separate some folks into isolation areas, which has been another level of really big stress for them, because they don't necessarily have symptoms. They're not showing to be positive with COVID, but they're doing it more around antibodies and protection. So that's been a little bit challenging and complicated too, that people don't understand. So we were getting some concerns about mothers that have been put into this isolation area, but that they keep saying to us that no one has COVID so far, and we're monitoring it daily with people on the ground there. I don't know about the other areas, but that's truly a little bit of a milagro story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, and that is really, great news to hear amongst a lot of the difficulties that are happening. It's really nice to hear that, that hasn't really been a big impact in that community. So that's really great. We will jump to this next question that we got a little bit earlier from Marjorie. They are saying, thank you for this important presentation and for speaking about the truth of this moment and the intersection with Black Lives Matter. Are there any avenues in Sonoma County to provide shelter and sanctuary for those released at the border? Marjorie did mention that this is a question that they get often from folks who remember the efforts to shelter unaccompanied minors in the 90s when a large number of minors had arrived at the border. So again, any avenues in Sonoma County to provide shelter and sanctuary for those released at the border?
You know, I don't know. And I think that is a part of the problem. It could be that honestly, I'm just not informed enough and I need to do my homework, but we do need to have a database, and this could be something that, you know, all of us can collaborate around, where we can make sure that we can tap into resources, and that those resources are they're clearly identified, and that we can refer people to those agencies that can provide sanctuary and support. But as of right now, I don't believe there's a centralized system that has that information in Sonoma County.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Well, you know, you heard it, folks. Maybe that is something that the folks here that are joining us in the webinar can jump on and work on. So that looks like it might be work to be done. So we'll jump to another one. So what we've seen a lot is that we get a lot of change. We got a question from registration that we've seen a lot of change happening specifically when youth are involved. And, you know, how often do you see youth getting involved in the efforts that you and Dr. Belinda are involved in at the border? And how can we support our youth who want to, you know, create that change?
So I think part of the work that we're seeing, okay, I'll just give you a story that happened just this week. So people were seeing in my community what I've been posting, the latest posts. Mostly I use Facebook because I feel like I can post videos and tell a little bit longer context of what's happening. And the families also, a lot of families follow the work that we're doing, and they know that we're sharing their stories. So my community and youth have also been following the story. So I got a call from a mom, and she said, Belinda, like my son who's in high school is really impacted by what you're sharing, what you're posting. He's been sharing with his friends, and they want to figure out how we can do something. She was like, is there any way that every one of them can gather $5 each and give something to the border, to the families? Like, is there something that can be done? And I said, oh my gosh, that is huge. You know, that's one action that creates in that moment just a little bit of love, you know? And I think it's kind of like the way I see it, acts of love getting them through the day, because they're so exhausted, they're so fatigued. And so a family wrote to me yesterday, and this is going to sound so simple to you, but I literally was crying when I read it, because they have been given a little bit of money that they needed. It was like $50. And they wrote a note saying, for the first time, when we lived in Honduras, we would go and eat Chinese food every Sunday. But since we've been here at the border, you know, they're hungry. They don't get to choose what they eat. They don't have money. They have nothing, right? But what everybody brings in. So they sent me photos of the families eating Chinese food that they bought yesterday. And it was a little one, like 4 years old, the mom and the dad. And I thought, oh my gosh, like that one moment for them of eating a plate of Chinese food that we eat, right? Like we can go and get it, to them was so significant. And so when my youth said, Belinda, we want to give $5 each, and what can we do with that? I said, well, the kids like to get a paleta when it's 105 degrees right now, and there's mosquitoes everywhere, and they're so hot. Like, can you imagine that one day, like, hey, every kid gets a paleta here, you know, thanks to the $5 that all these kids put together from California. I mean, it's an act of love, you know, and that act of love in that moment is huge. I mean, we might sit and think like, well, what is that? That's little. And honestly, it might feel like that, but when you see what they say, oh my gosh, it means a lot. Well, the night of the all the rain, they were getting bit so bad by mosquitoes, and our team was like going back and forth, like, how can we get 250 cans of mosquito repellent? And everybody was like, yeah, that's so bad for you and the skin and all that. But other than that, they were going to get bit so bad that there was no other choice than to just try to help them. And somehow we got 250 cans that night, and they were like, we're going to be able to sleep, we're going to be able to get through one more night. So some of it is little, it's like acts of love to get them through the day. Other things is huge acts, like starting petitions. Change.org, you can start a petition right now. You know, you can start writing about this. You can start doing presentations about it in your educational program. You can start talking about it. You can start advocating. So there's all kinds of levels of how you can get involved, and sometimes it's the little things and sometimes it's the big things.
I'll add to that, pay attention to Latino service providers in the community. They have some incredible young promotores that, you know, are doing amazing work. And what we're seeing right now is that when it comes to social movements, a lot of the folks that are on the front lines leading these uprisings are youth. They're young folks. So when we're thinking about like entrenched systems of oppression, those of us that, you know, have been here longer than others, maybe it might be a little bit more difficult for us to think about new ideas, new strategies. And youth, we're seeing young folks coming in saying, well, why does it have to be that way? Why can't we think creatively? And that's what I've been seeing. And I just was this weekend at a retreat in Occidental California with Latino service providers, and they were just amazing. They're bright, they're creative. So invest in our youth. I would say to the community, please invest in our youth because they've got it going on.
No, yes, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Dr. Belinda, that story that you mentioned is just, it's such a heartwarming and also like heartbreaking story at the same time, right? Because obviously the situation is not ideal for any human being, but those simple acts that could just really brighten up a day, just to people, so people can survive, you know, whether that means in a physical sense, like, you know, meals and stuff, but just on a mental health level as well, right? Those are really important.
We had one last thing really quickly. We had folks write letters, love letters to them. And we took them, and there was community members just like you, and we took all these letters to them. And a little girl stood by me and she read one by one to all the kids. And you should have seen the reaction when they heard people say, estamos contigo, los queremos, no están solos, son inspiraciones, like all the positive words. It just lit them up. So we can always send those letters too. If your group wants to, you know, collect letters, we can always send them to the border. And I know that they would love to get another round of letters. Now we're having to send everything because we can't go, but we have Pastor Abraham who we can get them to. We have teams of people down there that can take them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That sounds like a great idea. And that is definitely something we can talk about so we can, you know, get the word out to the community down there and make sure that, you know, they know that they're in our thoughts, right? So thank you so much. I know you all posted some of your social media handles down in the chat. So for folks, if you're able to open up the chat, you can see them there. Do you two want to elaborate a little bit on what folks can find on either, I think the Twitters or the Instagrams and Facebook, and like how you you relay information on there?
Yes, so I also want to add, I don't know if Dr. Hernandez Arriaga added Bay Area border relief on the comment. So what we are learning is that, you know, sometimes, and even if you think about COVID, right, like federal aid your checks are getting to you either delayed. Sometimes, you know, there are struggles with bureaucracy. When we rely on government agencies, sometimes the aid can take longer to get to people. So we are relying on grassroots organizations and mutual aid groups to be able to provide aid. And so what I would do is what I often do is, when people donate money, I'll take pictures of, you know, if I buy rice, if I buy beans, whatever type of aid I provide, I'll take a picture of the receipt. I also post some of the work that we've been doing in either Nogales or Texas, but also just, you know, scholars that I rely on to inspire me. Because I think it's important for us, sometimes we feel a little hopeless, or we feel like, you know, change is not going to happen because these issues are so entrenched. You know, change can happen. Social movements do create change, and we've seen this throughout history. So I rely on, you know, Black and brown scholars to be able to, you know, wake up in the morning and become energized and to, like, you know, mobilize. So I often post, like, you know, quotes by Angela Davis or James Baldwin or Gloria Saldúa, people that I admire, abolitionists, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, that talks about why it is that we should divest funds from detention facilities. So you'll see that on a lot of my accounts. But I think that if we are hoping to come together and join hands during this uprising to strive for racial and migrant justice, we need to stay connected. So you know, often in academic environments, there are concerns around like professors interacting with students and boundaries and all that. You know, at this point in time, we're experiencing two public health crises, you know, the COVID pandemic and the racial pandemic. So we need to be in communication. How do we do that in today's world? Social media. So please feel free to connect.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, what better way to connect right now than technology and social media, something that's, you know, very accessible to the majority of people and really easy to use sometimes, right? So, well, thank you, Doctora Daniela and Doctora Belinda. If either of you have any final words, you know, please feel free to jump in. If not, we will be closing this webinar. I do want to let folks know that if your questions didn't get answered, we will send them over to Dr. Daniela and Dr. Belinda to further answer them and maybe post some of those responses at a later time.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, just to close, you know, I just want to again thank you all. Thank you to the Latino Health Forum for inviting us. Again, I'm hopeful. I feel like change is happening. We're seeing social transformation happening every day. And Sonoma County, it's a beautiful community. We just have to tap into our assets, and we have to, you know, encourage our siblings across ethno-racial communities to see the beauty of the Latinx community, to see our strength, to see our resilience, and to support us. Because I say this often, we have been forgotten. You know, again, at the Lucian meeting, I said, you know, we're mourning the death of our siblings, the disproportionate deaths and fatalities that the Latinx community is experiencing in Sonoma County is tragic. So our eyes are open, our hearts are open. We just need people to help us to join the uprising.
And I want to say thank you so much. Just to keep it short with time, I just want to remind everyone of what the video said, ayúdanos, ayúdanos. And on behalf of the children of Matamoros, on behalf of the families, por favor, no los olviden. Please remember them in any way that you can. Ayúdanos, whether it's sharing and fighting for them, you know, through systems, or it's praying for them too, thinking about them. please push them to the front lines, and hopefully one day we will see that border wall break down. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Enrique, for having us, an introduction, and to all of you, Daisy and Pam at the Latino Health Forum. It's such an honor to be back again this year, and to my comadre Dani for being here with me. Mil gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias, doctora Domínguez. Gracias, doctora Hernandez Arriaga.